Guys, it's Chronicles of Solid here. Just going to do a review on the Kawasaki KLR650. My friend has kindly lent me his to do a review. So, quick specs. It's a 650cc single cylinder. It's a dual sport, obviously. It's probably the closest bike you'll get to 50-50, so 50 dirt, 50 road. It's a 5-speed, it's carburetted, and it's very simple, which is kind of one of its really good points, is its simplicity. Now, it's been in production for 30 years, and basically it's just a really reliable and a very popular dual sport motorcycle. He has a few modifications on it. You can see this top box up here. It's just $20 from a hardware store, and it does the job perfectly. He's got crash bars on here and a couple of 12 volts, I think. Stock on the bike that sets it apart from other dual sports is you do get a plastic bash plate, which probably would break if with one good hit, but it's done the job for him so far. The other difference you'll notice is it's got a fairing and a nice big screen, so it's a little more comfortable on the open road to tour on this thing as opposed to other dual sport motorcycles that don't offer as much protection. Okay, so let's get going. We'll see if we'll need choke or not to get this thing started. Nope, no choke needed. Now, hopping on this bike for the first time, the very first thing you'll notice is how easy it is to get along with this bike. It's just a very simple bike to ride. The turning circle and the handling are fantastic. It's a very easy bike to get along with. You can hop on it and feel like you've owned the bike for years. The second thing is the gem of a motor, in my opinion. It only makes about 40 horsepower, maybe a little less, and probably 40 odd newton meters of torque. But just the engine characteristics, you get most of that power and torque pretty much immediately, really. So it just kind of chugs along like the little engine that could just chug 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 chug. It's quite endearing. Now, first with the review, I'll probably go through the negatives, actually, get them out of the way first. Hopping on the bike and observing it while we're riding off-road, I think the rear spring is probably a bit weak, specifically for the off-road task. It's adequate on-road, but it's easily taken out of its comfort zone when the terrain gets a little rough. The rear spring isn't up to it. I also noticed, and my mate commented on, the spring not quite being strong enough to handle himself and his girlfriend and luggage on the back. It probably even struggles just with him and his girlfriend on the back, and that is with the preload on the hardest setting. So that's one thing to keep an eye out for. Although the 2014 model, the new KLR as they're calling it, it has a stiffer suspension, so they might have sorted that out. I'm not really sure. I haven't actually ridden a 2014, so I can't comment. Well, this is a mess, isn't it? All these kids are going to think I'm crazy for talking to myself. The second criticism of the KLR would have to be the doohickey. Now, for those of you who aren't in the know, that's just the internet nickname that the cam chain tensioner has received. I believe because some people just can't remember that mouthful of a word, so it's easier to call it the doohickey. So on the older models, the mechanism for the tensioner used to be a two-piece mechanism that was welded together, and that was quite famous for failing and breaking at the weld point. Kawasaki did address that problem and make a one-piece mechanism, but there are still some reports that that has failed on occasion, so some people do still replace it, although I wouldn't bother unless you can hear that classic rattle of the tensioner. The third criticism mainly circulates around the 2008 models, when they changed from the more utilitarian looking old KLR to this new fancier looking one. The piston rings would let through oil, and the KLR would burn through far too much of it. Kawasaki also addressed that, and it doesn't really have any oil burning issues, although some people have reported at high RPMs for extended periods the KLR does chew through a bit of oil, but my friend hasn't reported that issue on this particular bike, so I'm not sure how common that is. That's about it for criticisms, really. On to other parts of the motorcycle. The seat's relatively comfortable. It's better than my WR250R seat, but it's not as good as my BMW. And while we're on the subject of those two bikes, it's probably the best way to sum up this motorcycle, really, is that if my BMW and my Yamaha WR got a little frisky one night in the garage and had a baby, this would be the result. It's kind of like a in-between bike between those. It's a true 50-50 dual sport motorcycle. I'll go through each bike and why he chose this over that bike. The closest to the KLR is probably the Suzuki DR650. Now, arguably it's a better bike off-road, and it's a bit lighter. It's about 20 kilos lighter, and it's slightly more simple in its air cooling, but it doesn't afford the same amount of space for a pillion as a KLR does. It's better suited for taking two people, this bike, and being that my mate regularly pillions and tours with a pillion, the KLR was the more sensible option over the DR650. Now, the other competition would be the Yamaha XT660Z, and that bike is arguably a better bike, but that's mainly because it has more expensive components. It's a little more highly tuned, and of course that costs more money. So the Tenere is probably another $4,000 on top of this, and my friend was on a very tight budget. Probably should have changed down gear then. So he was on a very tight budget, so that is another reason KLR is fantastic, is its affordability. It's just very cheap for a brand new motorcycle, and even more so when you're looking for second hand. The other bike that's fairly close to this is the BMW G650 GS Sertau, I believe it's called, and for the same reasons as the Yamaha 660 Tenere. Basically everything is a little more expensive. It's about $3,000 or $4,000 more, and my friend being on a tight budget, that was instantly ruled out. Now this bike, summarized, is probably the Swiss Army knife of motorcycles, really. You can tour on this, tour up with luggage, you can commute on this easily, you can go off-road, and you can even do single track if you're very, very good. Now this bike will do all that and without complaint, but obviously being able to do so many things, you obviously have to compromise, and so it's not very good at any one particular task, so it tends to get a bit of criticism for that. There's quite a polarizing motorcycle actually. There's a very, very large and dedicated following to the KLR, but at the same time there's also a large group of people who criticize it from multiple angles, because it isn't the best off-road bike, it isn't the best on-road bike, so obviously you'll get people who criticize it for those failings. One thing that's noticeable straight away from my WR is the extra wind protection from the fairing here. That's quite nice, but if you were concerned about dropping it off-road, there's just more stuff to break really, but it is nice when you're on the road. The brakes are adequate. I'd say they're a little less responsive than my WRs, but it might just be down to the extra weight. This weighs probably 30 or so kilos more. Yeah, 30 or 40 kilos more than my WR, so you do notice that. It is, however, much lighter than my BMW, and you really notice that in its handling. Hustles along quite nicely. The top end isn't much to write home about, but the bottom end is really nice. You get a nice surge of torque. Yeah, as I was saying before, the 2014 model did get a few updates, so it got a softer seat and stiffer suspension. So those are two things that would be a nice addition. The reach to the handlebars is perfect when you're sitting down. Standing up, it's probably a little bit too hunched over to grab the bars comfortably. It's a bit better than my F700, but not quite as good as the Yamaha WR250R for reaching the bars. I can stand on that comfortably. This, if this was my motorcycle, I'd be getting bar risers to correct that. Another thing to keep an eye out for is that if you are planning to do a considerable amount of off-road, there's probably two things that I would change straight away. The first would be the tyres. They're adequate for if you're just doing road and say fire roads, like just regular dirt roads, but they're a little out of their depth for serious off-road, so I'd probably get something a little more aggressive once these wore out. The other is the foot pegs. Now if you're a dual sporter but you like wearing MX boots like I do, and my mate went out and got some MX boots as well after deciding that he wanted some more protection. Of course, he got home and we tried fitting in his boot into between the gear lever and the brake lever and the pegs here, and it just wouldn't. Even with full adjustability. Oh, come on, Grandma. Even with everything adjusted to the maximum, he just couldn't fit his feet in, nor could I, and we're both about size 10, size 11. So you'd probably have to get some aftermarket foot pegs to fit in MX boots, so keep that in mind. But if you're happy just to use touring boots or adventure boots, you'll probably be fine. Now I do apologise, but I won't be able to take this into the dirt, purely because I don't want to crash my friend's bike, so I'm just going to do this road test. Just to kind of round up the review and go over all the points, this basically is the bike for you if you're on a tight budget. You need a motorcycle to do everything, including off-road, and you want to be able to take a pillion. Those are basically, if those are your criteria, this should be at the top of your list. I'm not saying it should be the bike you get, but you should at least give it a test ride, I think. I've ridden this for a couple of days now and I really enjoy it. Now my friend does comment that coming from a Yamaha Phaser, the FZ8S, I believe, the 800cc Yamaha, it was a bit of a drop in horsepower by about 60 horsepower, so he does miss the power a little bit. But he said that the versatility of this motorcycle basically makes up for all its shortcomings at the end of the day. Another motorcycle, old Kawasaki, and ZX14. Nice bike. Filthy children everywhere. The height of the motorcycle is probably another thing I should touch on before I end the video. When I've got both feet on the ground, I'm not tippy toes, but I am on the balls of my feet, and I'm 180 centimeters tall, if that gives you any kind of indication. I can easily get one foot flat down if I leave the other foot on the pegs. It isn't a particularly high motorcycle as far as dual sports go, but the seat is wider than a lot of other dual sports I've been on, so that's probably half the reason for feet not being flat foot. Anyway, just pulling into my street. So once again, thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope this review was helpful, and I'll see you in the next videos. The Chronicles of Solid out.